Paleocrat, this is my last one, I promise, buddy. I appreciate you being a good sport about all this. I've kind of had some fun at your expense, but it's all in fun, and hope we've kind of discussed some legitimate issues along the way. I have a guy on here that's only got 16 videos, and 9 of them are to me, so I kind of feel like he's a little bit of a stalker. So hope you won't feel that way about these 4 out of my 120 or whatever it is. But just wrapping up a couple of loose ends. One thing I didn't get to is that Detroit is actually making the same amount of cars, but the car industry is expanding, and they're actually, cars are becoming available to a greater and greater percentage of the world's population because, like we've said, through the proliferation of knowledge and competition and things like that. I was reading an article where brand new car coming off the line in India now is going to be made available to people in Europe and Asia over there for about the equivalent of $6,500, something like that. So the car market is expanding, and it's what is happening with the Japanese car makers taking over the #1 spot, is that they're garnering a bigger share of that market. The amount of employees employed by the Detroit car companies has gone down, but their actual efficiency in their plants and in their operations has gone up, and so they're making the same amount of cars with less employees, and it also represents a smaller share of the market now than before. So anyhow, make of that what you will. I guess that's probably why it didn't get thrown in with the rest of it, because it doesn't really flow very well with anything, but make of it what you will. The second thing is, you hear me talking, especially in the third video, a lot about society, and the natural response to that is, well, John, you're a libertarian, you're all about, the individual. Why all this concentration on the society? But I talk about society in really in terms that relates directly back to the individual. And I always say, you can't have a rich society made up of poor individuals. You can't have a happy society made up of sad individuals. A society is only a bunch of individuals put together. So the unit to concentrate on is the individual. So you have to do what is best for individuals. And standard of living is what this all comes down to. And the standard of living for the individual is where this rests. And what I would not have is for one person's standard of living to be artificially propped up at the expense of another person's standard of living. And that's where you get into issues of transfer of wealth. And so I believe in individuals are the most important unit to concentrate on, and the natural argument is to say, but John, you're talking about what's good for society, but look at these individuals here in Michigan that are so adversely affected by this, and you're saying it's good for society. But what I'm really saying is that society will be made up of more individuals with a higher standard of living. And what you're doing when you prop up somebody in Michigan or you prop up somebody in Oklahoma is you sacrifice somebody else's standard of living somewhere else, and you're having a transfer of wealth there. I call this the aftermath. Who's to blame? So who really is to blame? And I'm already having to check my time because I've wasted too much time. But who's to blame on this? And, there's a great quote, and I wish I could remember who it was from, but it says, the governors govern at the consent of the governed, whether explicit or complicit. Check that out. The governors govern at the consent of the governed, whether explicit or complicit. So what that means is, in a free, well, I'll come back to that, but let me say this first. In a free society, you only have yourself to blame. It's individual responsibility. And so what I mean, the unions in Michigan and in the quote-unquote Detroit, they knew all along about the proliferation of knowledge, or they should have. They probably didn't, because unions have never understood economics, but they should have known that the world was catching up. And this whole time they enjoyed this exclusivity, they kept pushing, and they kept pushing, and they kept pushing. And even in the face of global competition, they kept pushing. And the big three were saying, we've got $4,000 of health care costs built into every car that we're making, and our cars can't compete in price on the world market. And the unions kept pushing. They kept pushing for higher and higher and higher benefits packages, when they already enjoy packages that put them at the top of wage earners in this country. And the same in the steel industry. The steel industry lies dormant in Pittsburgh now. You can see whole complete factories that are just shuttered because the union drove them out of business. And the same thing has happened. Blame yourself. If you're looking for somebody to blame for this debacle in Battle Creek and Detroit, look at the unions first. Look what they've done. They've pushed their compensation packages so far beyond the market value of their services. They've driven these guys near bankruptcy. Chrysler is now a plaything for private equity firms. And it was once one of the most powerful companies, in this country. Who else to blame? I blame the management of the big three. There was bad management involved. They bet on the SUV and the truck and the minivan. And I don't know if that was something that could have been predicted or not, this huge swing we've seen back into the more fuel-efficient vehicles. But they bet big time on a higher percentage of their lineup dedicated to SUV, to trucks, and to minivans than the foreign car makers did. And the foreign car makers are cashing in on their bet on the small car, and American automakers are losing on their bet right now on the SUV and the truck and the minivan. And this is where that saying about the governors governing at the consent of the governed, whether explicit or complicit, you may say, well, this government, the government has plenty of blame in this, and of course they usually do in realms of, economic distress. There's plenty of blame for the government usually. And you have a government that's had all this interference into the market and has restricted free trade and made markets difficult to enter and made things more advantageous for other car makers and what have you. But guess what? The unions have consistently aligned themselves with the liberal Democratic Party, who promote these restrictions on free trade. These are the very guys that the unions have helped put in office. The unions never ever endorse a Republican candidate that the Republicans at least pretend, to be on the economic liberty, and these guys have been complicit in their endorsement of the government that has created these problems for their own industry. So, if you're looking for someone to blame, don't blame free trade. You can blame, the unions first. You can blame some management. You can blame the government. But even the government is your own fault, because you supported the ones that were there. And so, don't point to a market that's rife with interference and then blame capitalism and free trade. Well, you need to be looking for blame. If you want to blame the empty neighborhoods in Battle Creek and Detroit on somebody, you can start at laying that at the feet of the unions. And you can spread it around a little bit to the management of the big three. And you can spread it around to the government a little bit. But for the most part, that part that you spread to the government is, complicit action on the part of the Detroit unions in the first place. So, that's it. All my time's gone for my fourth one. Hoping I haven't wasted too much of your time. And I've kind of enjoyed this. I consider you a worthy opponent. So we'll talk to you later, and we'll catch you around YouTube.